Hello, welcome to my podcast episode. We're going to be going over teaching and learning in a multicultural society. I have a guest here with me today. This is Miss Sarah Baker. Sarah, would you give us a little bit of background on your knowledge with teaching and learning and education? And we'll start off with the first question, like how have you learned, like what have you learned in relation to this theme?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the
Yeah, for
podcast.
sure.
So just to give everyone else a little bit of background, I am a third grade teacher at a local elementary school up in Snohomish. And it's actually where I went to elementary school, which is really cool. I graduated with an elementary education degree, with a minor in psychology from Washington State University back in May of 2024. Just to answer that question, I think the biggest thing is taking what you've learned from college and moving it into the classroom. Like, you'll never really know what it's like until you're the one teaching it and you're the one doing it. The biggest thing that I can say is honestly just creating those relationships with those kids, whether it be race or whether it be on their intelligence level. For example, like highly capable kiddos. Um, but I would just say overall, you can learn all the things that you can learn in college and you can have people tell you all these different things, but you're never truly going to understand until you're put in front of the kids. And I would just say building those relationships and creating that one on one with them is the most important piece because they feel like they can come to you and they can talk to you, especially those kiddos with those different socioeconomic backgrounds, or like I said, those highly capable kids, or whether it's a race issue, things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Um, in what ways did these kind of concepts transform your thinking into your teaching?
Yeah, so I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. I went to a predominantly white middle school, elementary school, and white high school. Yes, was some diversity, but I would say now there's a lot more diversity. I have quite the diverse group of third graders, which is such a blessing because I'm able to learn from them every single day. And I would just say, like I said earlier, like just building those relationships. It is
Like
sort
an
of
equitable environment, right?
yes. Um, and just being able to be around those kids and learn from them and learn about their culture, has been a really awesome experience. Um, and I would just say I've always kind of had similar thinking about the way I treat kids, um, and the way that I build those relationships with them. But I would say just the number one thing is trying to understand everyone's point of view and trying to have empathy and trying to put yourself in those kids' shoes and what they go through in life.
Right, right.
So kind of just going off that, Sophia, I was curious how those thresholds, those concepts, how are they irreversible and integrative for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that really, as an irreversible concept, once these are understood, they fundamentally change the way educators approach teaching and learning, and that includes
Mhm.
cultural competence, intersectionality, and implicit bias.
Right. Well, and I'm
Um,
sure you see a lot of that too in your field service work.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. I've seen that in my multicultural, multilingual classroom that I've been volunteering in. Just incorporating inclusive curriculum and, the critical pedagogy that we've been learning in this major has been just a critical piece for me,
Right.
um, just to keep in the back of my mind constantly.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so, Sarah, how do you deal with some of the learning challenges related to teaching and learning in a multicultural classroom?
Yeah. There are definitely some challenges, and I'm sure anyone who is an educator or becoming an educator, can relate to. I would say one of my biggest challenges is, having that culture shock. Um, I have a lot of kiddos whose parents are from India, and their parents expect them to have this mentality where they need to be the best constantly. And that was something that was different than what I learned in college and then what I grew up with my parents and my education. It was always trying your best and you wanted to succeed and you wanted to be good, but I never felt like I had to be the best. However, those certain kiddos in my class, they constantly feel like they need to be the best.
Mhm.
Um, and it's definitely something I try to encourage them. Yes, you can be the best and you want to try your best, but you don't necessarily have to be the best.
Right.
And that's something I'm really struggling with at the moment because they just don't understand it necessarily. But I think in the long term, having good grades and going to college and getting a good job, that will help you out in your future, but also having the self-esteem and the
Right.
confidence to continue to try and learn new things,
Mhm.
I think is one of the
Even if you're not going to be good at them right away,
yes,
it's okay to,
exactly.
learn new things
Mhm.
and yeah.
Well, and I think those kinds of kiddos too in my class, they struggle with that because
Mhm.
when they fail at something, they don't understand what that means for them.
Right.
So,
For sure.
but kind of going off that, and I know you're still in school,
Yeah.
um, and I'm sure you're learning and you've got lots of different references and artifacts and whatnot. What are some of the references that you have been talking about related to this
Right.
theme? Because they're different. You're at UW Bothell, but
Mhm.
I went to Washington State, so I'm
Mhm.
sure my references are going to be a little bit different.
Right.
What are some of the references that you have been kind of learning about?
For sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Pulling something actually from Center for Multicultural Education at UW,
Hmm.
I found Diversity Within Unity. It's basically like essential principles for teaching and learning in a multicultural society. I've pulled a few great
Hmm.
ideas from there. Another one that I've found is also called Teaching and Learning in a Multicultural Society by
Yeah.
Sarah Hawk.
Hmm.
Um, and she does some academic work that explores like the complexities of multicultural education, and it delves more into various concepts and practices
Okay.
essential for teaching in diverse cultural
Yeah,
contexts.
that's great.
As far as I have, like, as far as my artifacts go that I've seen this,
Mhm.
definitely working at the middle school that I work at
Mhm.
in a very, very multicultural classroom. That's like the whole
Yes.
concept of my
Yeah.
classroom. I've gotten some great notes
Mhm.
specifically towards teaching and learning in a multicultural classroom, um, that just like the critical analysis of it all,
Mhm.
really delving into how I see what I've practiced
Mhm.
in, these classes that I've taken and how I see that in the classroom. And it's been such a treat to see these kids I'm just learning so much from them, and they're just showing me um, just what it means to, be an educator in that setting.
Yeah.
And I even touched on this in my site supervisor letter that I sent back to Kenmore, just as like a thank you. um, Basically, I was just explaining to them, like, I have never had such a great experience in an educator field before, and basically just thanking them for allowing me to be in this space, in this multilingual, just great learning environment. um, and I basically just touched on how it helped me fully understand this concept and how I would absolutely love to continue to grow in here.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Moving on, how will your past challenges influence your future learning in relation to this theme? It's kind of a tricky question, but
Well, like I was saying earlier, I grew up in a very predominantly white area, a
right,
very white neighborhood.
right.
Um, and so I would say that is kind of a challenge. Just because I didn't grow up with a lot of diversity,
Hmm.
that doesn't necessarily mean that my mind isn't open to it and I don't know how to handle it. But I would say growing up with that, I don't have a lot of background knowledge in
Right,
that.
right.
And I do like to pride myself. I do think I am a very empathetic person. I do think I can put myself in other people's shoes in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
So I would say I'm just continuing to grow with that.
Yeah.
I do a lot of research. I have lots of different religions in my classroom. I've had lots of different races, and like I was saying, like lots of different highly capable kiddos, just different levels of learning. So I
Hmm.
would just say, taking from what I know from school, from what I've learned at Washington State,
Right.
and then versus my field service when I student taught in a second grade classroom versus teaching now, I would say it's just I'm learning bit and bit each day.
Yeah.
So I would just say, you know, I'm learning and reflecting on my past experiences,
Right.
and I'm also bringing those to light so I can say, okay, this didn't work well when I grew up.
Hmm.
Let's try something different. Or this didn't work with this lesson,
Right.
and this didn't apply to every kiddo in this class, so let's try something different in a
Right.
way.
And
Right.
I think that that could also be like a part of like one of your greatest strengths too. Like you mentioned your empathy and your ability to self-reflect
Mhm.
on, like teaching practices that didn't work, and it
Right.
maybe incorporating, an inclusive type of curriculum for your kiddos to
Mhm.
be able to,
Mhm.
just feel included. Because, like you said,
Yes.
um, we both grew up in a very predominantly white environment.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that, I mean, even in elementary school, I didn't really have an inclusive curriculum
Right.
towards other cultures, so I
Mhm.
didn't know much about, other cultures other than, like
Yeah.
the white culture, or,
Mhm.
like our history books that are now being debunked and everything like that.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think that your inclusive curriculum and your self reflection is just a great way to, um, I don't know, just grow this mindset of equity in your educational environment.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of going off that, what are some of like your aspects of your development from the theme, obviously, that can give you a pause or cause trepidation? Or in other words, how do you plan to engage with these issues? Because you are in a middle school,
Right.
you are currently doing your field service. So growing from that, like I said, it's a lot different when you're assisting versus
Mm-hmm.
when you are the adult, you are the
Right.
teacher in the classroom. So how do you plan to engage with these issues?
Yeah, for sure. I think a good first step is noticing an implicit bias,
Right. Mhm.
and then going from that, like, foundation, understanding how I can ensure equity and inclusion in such that diverse, like rich environment, like multicultural, multilingual educational environment.
Mhm.
And I think, going off of what you said, just constantly learning um, about like the inclusive practices that I could include, and
Right.
self-reflecting on what I have done that has worked, learning from my mentor teacher,
Right.
who is amazing at her job. I can't give her enough credit. And just really just doing more research on how I can be the best equitable educator, so that
Yeah.
each of my kids feels that they are important and that they are
Mhm.
valued.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
yeah.
having, like you said, that self-reflection piece, especially in the area that we grew up, is it helps you in more ways than one, and it's like it's such an immensely productive part of the curriculum and the engagement with
Mm-hmm.
kids is just being able to self-reflect, but also being able to go into a classroom and recognizing the biases, and
Mm-hmm.
especially at the grade level that you're at, kids start to take notice of different religions and different races and different backgrounds
For
and things
sure.
like that. Whereas in my class, my 8 and 9 year olds haven't quite seen that yet.
Yeah.
So I do have a little bit of a sweet spot. But I would just say self reflection is the biggest key.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on with me.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for
having me.
chatting about this. I really appreciate it, and we will talk to you guys later.
Thank you.